Hi and welcome to another narration, presented by yours truly, Cryptid's Roost. I have now shortened the oral intro, but you will find more info in the outro at the end of the video instead. Let's just take a moment's silence for all the haters. That's enough. Be sure to check out the blooper reel at the end of the video, followed by the end screen where you will find more videos listed. So grab your coffee, sit back and enjoy the show. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not. I followed the GPS on my stolen motorcycle, part 2, The Ritual. This awesome series is written by Moto-XL, a wonderful author over on Reddit. If you would like to read more of their works, a link to their Reddit profile will be below in the description. Moto-XL also has their very own YouTube channel where they also narrate creepypasta stories. You will find them listed under the moniker of Moto Camping Stories. That link will also be listed below, so be sure to check them out. Something cold and wet dripping against my face pulled me into consciousness. I blinked a few times and for a split second I thought everything I had just experienced was a nightmare. But as the blur from my eyes cleared, I saw that it had all been real. The guy that had tased me in his Chevy was dragging me by the ankle through the dangling animals that had been flipped inside out and strung up by their intestines. It was hard to see with the only light from the moon, but I could tell blood from some of the fresh ones had been what was dripping on my face. Chevy was also wearing a backpack. I groaned and tried to pull against his grip, but my entire body felt like it had been pounded with a meat mallet. A weak struggle caused my captor to glance back at me. He smirked before turning back to watch where he was going. The further we went, the darker it seemed to get. The eerie creaking branch sound was steady and rhythmic, and my mouth went dry as I thought about being around Molly again. When Chevy stopped dragging me, it was too dark to see anything further than a few inches from my face. He grunted as he propped me against a tree. My strength started to return, and as if he could sense it happening, he tied my hands together. Then he tied my feet. I heard the sound of rustling paper and then a popping sound. Then I heard something that resembled the sound of striking a match a few times before the hiss and bright red light of a road flare registered. The area was illuminated and I jumped. Molly was right in front of me, her bulging eyes tinted red from the flare, her long and slender arms dangling down to just above the ground. The light stretched ghastly shadows back from her figure that twitched from the light. Molly's eyes were focused on the ground at my feet. Chevy situated the flare on the ground before pulling out a second flare and lighting it as well. Molly continued to stare at the ground, unmoving. He put the second flare a little further away and I confirmed that we were in the same clearing I had been in before. My bike was in the same spot. Walking around Molly and standing in front of me, Chevy pulled out a knife. Instead of stabbing me with it, he pricked his thumb. Then he switched hands and pricked his other thumb. He then put the knife away and knelt in front of me, smirking as he placed his thumbs together at the centre of my forehead. He smeared a line of blood out to my hairline and I grimaced. Molly's bulging eyes snapped to me, but nothing else on her moved. Pulling the knife back out, the guy cut my ankles free and forced me to my feet. When I was standing, Molly's body quivered and sounded like cracking twigs. I swallowed hard as she took a stiff step towards me. She reached out her slender fingers and wrapped her hand around the back of my head, easing it towards her. Her bulging eyes stared into mine. She bent over and without breaking her stare, slowly opened her mouth, wider than any jaws should go. Her missing lips and cheeks made the ordeal more terrifying, so I shut my eyes. I'd always thought getting decapitated would be a terrible way to die, but having my head chewed off seemed worse. I felt the wind from Molly's jaw closing and heard the sound of her teeth clank together, and for a split second I was confused as to how I hadn't felt them. But then a searing pain on the side of my head told me she had bit through my ear instead of my head. I screamed and struggled against my restraints, but Chevy held me firm by the shoulders. With the chunk of my ear still clenched between her teeth, Molly stood in front of me for a few seconds, still staring. She eased her free hand up from her side and used 2 fingers to pull out my ear. She let my head go and took a few stiff, twitchy steps towards the closest tree. Using a sharpened fingernail on her free hand, she carved a symbol I didn't recognise into the blood-splattered bark. Then she tore my ear into strips and put the pieces inside the symbol. Seeing it made me quiver. Molly carved symbols in every tree in the clearing before coming back to me. Chevy pulled a long rope out from his bag. He looped it around my hand restraints before tossing one end over a low branch. Molly gripped my shoulders and lifted me up, and Chevy assisted until I was dangling from the branch. I instantly thought of the flipped inside-out animals and knew that I was next. Chanting in some language I didn't understand, Chevy pulled out a 3rd row flare and ignited it. He walked a steady pace in a circle around the clearing, chanting louder as he went and pointing the flare at the blood-splattered trees for a few seconds at a time. Then Molly put the palm of one hand against my bottom, and she wrapped her other hand around the base of my neck so that she could push against my collarbone. Lifting me up a little and slackening the rope, she started to squeeze her arms together. I felt my spine compress. I panicked as I thought of being flipped inside out, jerking as much as I could to cause her to lose her grip. I succeeded and she lost the grip on my bottom, removing the hand around my neck to try and steady me. When she let go of my neck, all of my weight was transferred back to the tree branch and it snapped. I hit the ground with my hands still tied, struggling to get back on my feet. I was successful and Chevy stopped chanting, charging towards me with the flare. With no other options, I jumped and drop-kicked him in the face. He slumped forward and I hit the ground again, but rolled over and made it back to my feet. I ran towards the edge of the clearing, stooping down to grab a flare before continuing. I glanced back just as I passed the edge of the clearing, and my heart dropped when I realised Molly was pursuing. Her run was as stiff as her walk, but her arms dangled at her side. Each move forward seemed jerkier than the last, but her stare was as unflinching as ever. At first, when we left the clearing, Molly vanished in the darkness since only I was carrying the flare. But as she gained on me, I could barely see her in the low red light. I thought if I could just make it to the road, I would be safe. Perhaps the forest was her prison and only I could exit. So I ran and ran and ran as fast as my legs would go. I hopped over downed trees and exposed roots. I dodged between trees, weaving around vines, but every time I looked back, Molly was there, closing the gap with her jerky gait and unflinching gaze. As Molly ran, I noticed the sounds of creaking branches transmogrified into the sound of dry leaves rustling in the wind. The more she closed the gap, the louder the sound became. It scratched against my ears and made my skin crawl. When it was loud enough to make me want to cover my ears, it suddenly stopped. I glanced over my shoulder and Molly was gone. I turned back around and saw the exit, but as I neared, the sound of rustling leaves returned, this time growing louder the closer I went to my salvation. I slowed my stride to a jog, knitting my brows together. A few feet from the tree line, I stopped. The sound of a car rolling down the road reached me, but I still couldn't move. In the red light of the flare, I saw Molly's slender figure uncurl from a branch on the tree directly ahead of me. Apparently she had balled up against the branch and then, holding on with one arm, slowly rolled down until her feet touched the ground. She stood in front of me no more than 6 feet away. Behind her was freedom. I took a deep breath and hurled the flare at her as hard as I could before running forward. I hoped the distraction would buy me enough time to make it past her. I was wrong. The flare bounced off her head, but she never stopped staring at me. I barely saw her arm as it swung forward and hit me in the nose. The world spun for a few seconds before the darkness enveloped me. And I hope you all enjoy the following blooper reel. The guy that had tased me in his Chevy was dragging me by the ankle through the dangling animals that had been flipped inside out and strung up by their intestines. My weak struggle caused my captor to glance back at me. She reached out her slender fingers and wrapped her hand around the back of my head. He looped it around my hand restraints before tossing one end over a low branch. I instantly thought of the flipped inside out animals and knew that I was next. Chanting in some language I didn't understand, Chevy pulled out a third row flare and ignited it. When she let go of my neck, all of my weight was transferred back to the tree branch and it snapped. I hopped over down trees and exposed roots. But as I neared, the sound of rustling leaves returned. Hey family, please be so kind as to throw punch the like button and smack the ass of the subscription button as well. And remember to chokehold that notification bell and then select all. That way you'll receive all notifications each time I upload a new video. And by subscribing, you'll be the first to see all of our new spooky creepypasta stories. A very big thank you to Moto-XL for allowing me to narrate this awesome story. Make sure to check out Moto-XL's Reddit for more brilliant stories, and also be sure to check out the Moto-XL playlist here for more of their stories that I have already narrated. I would just like to say a very big thank you to all of the authors that I have worked with and all the ones that I will work with in the future. So thank you all, my brothers and sisters. And why not hashtag cryptidsroost in your comments. If you would like to support the channel and buy me a coffee, I have now created an account at buymeacoffee.com. You can send your donations, big or small, to that site. Link is below, or via paypal.me/cryptidsroost. And don't forget to check out the end screen coming up shortly. That will also list some more videos in my back catalogue. Take care everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful and peaceful night. And don't forget, where fear is, happiness is not.